Hello, I'm the Horror Boy, and if you are here to relax and fall asleep, you are in the right place. Do not forget to subscribe and like the video, and now let us begin the story. There is a road that most people never remember taking, even though it still exists and looks completely normal. It does not appear dangerous or abandoned, but something about it feels unusually quiet, as if the road itself is holding its breath. The first time I drove down this road, I did not realize I had taken a wrong turn. One moment I was on the highway, and the next moment the trees felt closer. The air felt heavier, and time itself seemed to slow down. At the end of the road stood a small wooden house located right at the edge of the forest. It had only one floor, a narrow porch, and a single warm light glowing softly behind the curtains. There were no cars parked nearby, no footprints on the ground, and no sound coming from inside the house. The only sign of life was the light, which remained steady and calm, as if it had been waiting. People in the nearby town said the house was not abandoned. But they also said that no one had seen anyone enter or leave it for many years. They spoke about it quietly, as if the house could hear them even from a distance. I parked my car on the side of the road and slowly stepped outside. The forest did not respond to my presence, and there were no insects, no wind, and no movement among the trees. As I walked toward the house, each step felt heavier than the last, and it felt as though the ground itself wanted me to slow down. When I stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaked softly beneath my feet. Before I could knock on the door, it opened slowly and calmly, as if someone inside already knew I had arrived. When I stepped inside, I immediately noticed that the house felt warm and lived in, not dusty or forgotten. A lamp glowed quietly in the corner, and a clock ticked steadily on the wall, making time feel louder than usual. That was when I realized there were no mirrors anywhere in the house. Not on the walls, not in the hallway, and not even in the bathroom. Instead of mirrors, the walls were covered with old photographs showing different people from different times, all standing in front of the same house. Every face in the photographs carried the same tired expression, as if they had stayed longer than they meant to. When I looked at my reflection in the glass, I realized something unsettling. I looked more tired than I remembered feeling when I arrived. My eyes appeared heavy, and my expression looked distant, as if the house had already begun to claim a part of me. I turned away from the window, suddenly aware of how quiet my thoughts had become. I tried to remember why I had decided to stop at the house in the first place. The reason felt blurry, like a dream that fades moments after waking. I walked back toward the front door and reached for the handle. It did not move, no matter how gently or firmly I tried to open it. There was no panic in that moment, only a quiet understanding that the house did not respond to urgency. Instead, it seemed to reward patience and stillness. I sat down in the chair near the lamp, telling myself that I would rest for a moment and leave when I felt ready. The chair was comfortable, and the light was warm enough to make my eyelids feel heavy. As I sat there, memories began to surface, including moments I had not thought about in years. They were not painful memories, but unfinished ones, the kind that linger quietly in the back of the mind. The house felt like it was listening, not with ears but with attention. For the first time in a long while, I felt understood without having to explain anything. I do not remember falling asleep that night. I only remember feeling calm enough to stop resisting rest. When I woke up, the house was silent, and the light was still glowing softly. The notebook on the table had been opened to a blank page, and a pen rested beside it. I knew what the house was asking for, even though it never spoke. It wanted my story, written calmly and honestly, like the others before me. And as I picked up the pen, I realized how easy it would be to stay. The house did not trap people by force, but by giving them permission to finally stop moving. The second story. The house at the end of Ridgeway Lane had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Yet every light inside it turned on at exactly the same time every night. No one admitted to owning it, and no one remembered seeing anyone move in or out. Still, at precisely 3:33 a.m., the windows glowed softly, as if the house itself had decided to wake up. I noticed it first, because my bedroom window faced directly toward the property. At the beginning, I convinced myself it was a faulty timer or a squatter who kept strange hours. Over time, that excuse became harder to believe because the lights never varied, not even by a second. The pattern was perfect, in a way only machines, or something pretending to be a machine could manage. One night, curiosity finally overcame fear, and I decided to watch instead of turning away. I sat by the window with the lights off, staring at the house as the clock on my phone ticked closer to the hour. When it reached 3:33 a.m., every light snapped on instantly, from the basement to the attic. That was when I noticed something standing in the upstairs window. The shape was tall and motionless, like a person frozen mid-thought. It did not move its head or shift its weight, and it did not blink. I stared back, telling myself it was a trick of shadows, until I realized that its outline did not match any human proportions I recognized. The following morning, I walked past the house on my way to work, determined to prove to myself that it was ordinary in daylight. The windows were dark, the paint was peeling, and the front door was sealed shut with boards that looked decades old. There were no footprints in the dirt, no chidi tracks, and no scenes of recent activity. That night, the lights turned on again. This time, the figure was closer to the glass, and I could see that it had no face. Its head was smooth, stretched tight over bone, and angled slightly, as if it were listening for something far away. I felt an intense pressure behind my eyes, the uncomfortable sensation of being examined rather than observed. The next day, a note appeared taped to my front door. The paper was yellowed and brittle, and the handwriting was cramped and uneven. It warned me not to look directly at the house after the lights turned on, because it learned faces faster than names. I tried to ignore the warning, but sleep became impossible. On the third night, I stayed in bed with my back to the window, convincing myself that refusing to look would keep me safe. At 3:33 a.m., the lights came on anyway, and the glow seeped through the walls, bright enough to illuminate the room. Then I heard footsteps inside my house. They were slow and careful, moving from room to room as if counting the space. I lay completely still, listening as the steps stopped outside my bedroom door. The handle did not turn, but I felt the presence on the other side, patient and certain. A voice spoke through the door, calm and unfamiliar, and it used my name perfectly. It explained that the house on Ridgeway Lane had never been empty, and that it only borrowed shapes when it needed to travel. It thanked me for watching so closely, because observation made the transition easier. At exactly 3:34 a.m., the lights in the house across the street turned off. At the same moment, the light in my hallway turned on, even though I had not touched the switch. The door opened slowly, and I finally understood that the house had not been looking at me from across the street. It had been practicing. The town had emergency sirens for decades, standing on hills around the outskirts. But most people had long stopped paying attention to them. They were tall, rusted towers with faded warning labels, installed when floods and factory accidents were still a real threat. Children grew up hearing tests every few months, and adults learned to ignore the sound entirely. Everyone knew the system had only two meanings. One long blast meant severe weather, two long blasts meant evacuation. The instructions were printed on old signs near the town hall, sun bleached and ignored. There was no third signal. That was why I woke up instantly when the siren sounded 3 times. The noise was deeper than the test alarms, heavier somehow, and it seemed to vibrate inside my chest instead of just my ears. I checked my phone immediately, expecting emergency alerts or evacuation orders, but the screen stayed empty. There were no notifications, no news updates, and no warning messages from the town. Outside, porch lights flicked on one by one as confused neighbors stepped into the street. No one spoke loudly. People glanced at each other with the same question on their faces, because everyone understood that something had gone wrong. Mrs. Calder, who had lived in the town longer than anyone else, stood gripping her porch railing with white knuckles. She whispered that the siren was never supposed to sound 3 times anymore. She said the third signal was removed from public instructions because it caused panic. According to her, the third signal was not meant to warn people to leave. It was meant to warn people to stay invisible before anyone could ask what that meant. The power went out across the entire town. Streetlights died at once, and the houses were swallowed by darkness. The siren stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete that it felt unnatural. I went back inside and locked every door, even though I did not know what I was protecting myself from. The air felt wrong, thick and tense, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I stood by the window, watching the street, when I noticed movement near the far intersection. Something was there, but it did not reflect light properly. It shifted in short, une vaine motion, like as juggling. What shape wanted tea? As it moved, the darkness around it seemed to deepen, swallowing details instead of revealing them. My phone buzzed in my hand, nearly making me drop it. The message came from no number and showed no sender. The text was short but precise, written in calm, official language. You are safe as long as it does not realize you are being observed. My heart began to pound as the thing in the street stopped moving. Slowly, it turned its attention toward my house, even though I had not made a sound. The windows creaked softly, not from pressure, but from the cold that followed it. Across the street, someone screamed, and the sound cut off suddenly, as if it had been removed from the air rather than silenced. Curtains fell shut in nearby houses, but it was already too late. The thing moved closer, and with every step, the shape of the world around it bent slightly out of alignment. I backed away from the window, remembering Mrs. Calder's warning. I lowered myself to the floor, pressed myself against the wall, and forced myself to stay perfectly still. Because I knew the moment it realized I was real would be the moment I was no longer safe.